Hello chess friends, how are you all doing? Today, I have two games to showcase where LeelaZero and I created absolutely mind-blowing chess openings. In the first game, Leela played against Decisive and used the f4 move in the opening, inventing a new chess opening trap. Additionally, I discovered a new chess opening in the Caro-Kann defense. Both games are at a super high level, so let's dive right in without any delay. Leela starts the game with e4, and after e5, we see f4, the King's Indian Gambit. By the way, I also made a video on the King's Gambit opening, you can check it out after watching this video. I'll include the link in the description. In this opening, you can advance your pawn to d4, bring out your bishop on f4 if black captures it, develop your light square bishop and castle to activate the rook file on the king side. This allows you to launch a heavy attack. After captures occur in the game, you can play d4 or move the bishop to c4 or knight to c3. All three moves are possible in the game, but Leela chooses to play the usual move knight to f3, which is absolutely good. Black eventually cannot play g5. After knight c6, you gain superb control in the center. If black dares to play g5 to protect the f1 square from your bishop, it can weaken their central position after you play d5. This move is quite significant. After your knight retreats to b8 instead of d7 to avoid blocking the queen's pawn protection, you can play queen to d4, initiating an attack on the rook. Black will likely block with the queen, allowing you to play e5 and force the queen to move again. Then you can bring out your knight and black play bishop g7, attempting to attack your queen, but then you played the stunning move bishop d3, forcing the queen to move. After the queen moves, trying to initiate a queen exchange, you can decline it by playing queen e4. Then, after the pawn moves, you can play bishop d6, creating vulnerability against the king. Your bishop plays a crucial role on this diagonal, your queen is active in the center, and the knight on d5 is poised to join the attack. Meanwhile, black's king structure and pawn chain are weak, and their minor pieces are still on their starting squares, h6, and after capturing the pawn, you can follow up with knight d5 to attack black's queen. After the queen moves away, you can play the cunning move, bishop to b5, capturing the bishop right away is not an option for black because of the fork on c7, leading to the loss of their queen. If the queen moves to c5, you can then play b4. With no way for the queen to retreat and protect herself, black will lose the queen immediately. This position is very critical for them. And let me share a quote with you in sudden. Loyalty to others is important, but loyalty to yourself is essential to your survival. Going back, Leela's opponent chose not to play g5, as it would leave them in a vulnerable position. Instead, he simply moved their knight to f6. Some might consider playing d5, given the central control by the knight on e5. However, d5 isn't a good option because it would immediately block the bishop's e4 option, disrupting the bishop's line. The best move is indeed to play e5, which was actually played in the game. This sets up the possibility of bishop takes f4, allowing you to gain control of the c4 diagonal with tempo. By moving your knight away from d5, you can plant your bishop on c4 and open up the diagonal for your bishop. This combination in the King's Gambit can be very tricky. Leela's opponent tried to play knight to e3, but some may consider playing knight to b6. However, this isn't a good option, as you can capture the pawn on f7, leading to a situation where you can castle and gain control of the open f-file, putting pressure on your opponent. In this position, you can bring your queen out to f3 to launch an attack, and later bring out your knight to g5 to put pressure on the king side, potentially leading to a game-ending scenario. However, Leela's opponent played knight to e3. After captures and recaptures occurred in the game, there was a situation where the pawn could be attacked by queen to d3, which some players might consider, but this move gives the opponent the opportunity to play knight to a5 with a tempo on the bishop. To prevent this, Leela first moved her knight from c3, then, after knight to a5 happened, in this position, Leela executed an absolutely brilliant and cunning move, bishop takes f7, directly challenging the king in the center of the board. With two super active knights, I plan to castle to activate the f5 rook and possibly bring out my queen to h5 if needed. This position is critical for my opponent. After castling, the file opens up, allowing the knight to potentially move to g5. The threat of playing knight to f7 and attacking the queen and rook becomes evident. Following the king's retreat to her home square, Leela planned to play queen to d3, further challenging the opponent's king. You can see that Leela activated her pieces very effectively. Her knights are super active. The queen can enter the f5 square, and some may consider playing pawn to d6 to try to open up the lines for the bishop, bring out the queen, and execute a long castle. However, after capture, Leela can eventually play rook to e1, gaining control of the open file. The bishop moves to e6, aiming for a long castle to protect the king. However, after Leela capture the pawn, the queen moves to e7 to defend the bishop. Leela can then play knight to g5, directly challenging your bishop in the center of the board. It becomes clear that there's no way to protect your bishop, so, going back to the position, we can see that d6 was a bad move. Her opponent tries to play b6 to activate their bishop along this diagonal, but after Leela captured the pawn and played queen d3, I'm safeguarding the a6 square, preventing the bishop from creating a vulnerable situation around my rook. With b4 coming to attack the knight, some may consider playing knight to b7, which seems natural. However, after the rook moves to a1 and black plays d6 to open up files for the bishops, Leela can make a powerful move, knight to d5, attacking the bishop. After captures, when black plays bishop to e6 to attack my knight, Leela can capture the pawn. Black then plays queen to d6 to protect the bishop, but Leela can play the stunning move, rook takes e6, sacrificing my rook. After you capture the rook, knight takes c7 creates a fork on the king and queen, leading to a winning position. In this position, instead of playing 200 illustrated moves, black played the good move, bishop to b7, to activate the bishop along this diagonal. Leela then tried to block the diagonal by playing d5, pushing my pawns closer to their king side. The move d5 protects the c6 square from the knight's entry. d4 is coming to attack the knight, and the bishop's diagonal is closed off. By playing d5, Leela gives black the opportunity to play bishop to c5 check, but it won't create a vulnerable situation for my king. After the queen moves and Leela plays queen to e4, supporting the b4 square allows me to push my pawn to b4 and attack the knight. Later, Leela can play the knight to g5 move and launch an attack along this file. Additionally, you can see that the bishop's diagonal is completely closed off by Leela's super active pawns in the center. Black played g6, but I believe bishop a6 was a very good move. Thanks to this move, Leela had the opportunity to play b4. After the rook and knight moved to h4 c4, she gradually captured the knight. When black struck the center by playing pawn to c4, it created a potentially dangerous situation for me, but Leela completely blocked it by playing pawn to b5. Her pawns, located on the 5th rank, threatened to advance to the d6 square, making the bishop vulnerable. If black dares to capture the knight, she can eventually recapture it, where the queen can create a vulnerable situation on the king side. So, in this position, after the queen moves to d8, here, Leela made an amazing move by sacrificing her knight on g6. After black captures it, you can see that the king side becomes very weakened. The move d6 confidently attacks the bishop, regardless of where it goes, as knight e4 gradually comes to attack it. This move threatens to play knight f6 check with the open diagonal of the queen and the rook file. If you dare to capture the knight, after the capture, you have to protect the g6 square. While the rook comes to protect it, it wouldn't help much because I have the move queen to d5. And an even stronger move, queen to f3, threatening to give a checkmate in one move, and regardless of how you protect against it, I can still checkmate you by playing queen to f8. Going back to the position, we saw that bishop takes knight, which was a very bad move. After the check, Leela's king moves slightly away, playing a5, then Leela makes the astonishing move, knight to f6, directly challenging the black king. Regardless of how you defend it, your position is just over. For instance, if you capture with the knight using your rook, then queen g8 will result in a checkmate after queen takes f8. In this position, if you dare to capture with the queen, which actually happened in the game, I can win your queen by capturing it with the rook. My rook is coming there, and my queen is moving to the g4 square to create a vulnerable situation around your queen. The rook cannot capture the rook because I will get the passed pawn. Leela is making very hard and super cool moves to dominate black's position. After a few moves later, Leela exchanges the rooks, gives a check, and eventually wins the game after playing queen to g8, checkmate. What a wonderful game by LeelaZero. She invented a new chess opening trap in the king's gambit by playing f4. In this position, she even sacrificed her bishop on f7, leading to a winning position where the black king is exposed. This resulted in a situation where the queen, knight and rook joined forces to attack the black king's side. The center pawns completely dominated the game, showcasing Leela's dominance. Let's move on to our next game, where I showcased a brilliant opening trap in the Caro-Kann defense. Let's delve into that. This game was actually played between me and Small Brain, not a small brain like yours but a chess engine from a different countryside. After e4, black played the Caro-Kann defense, which I talked about. You can even play the knight to f3 or knight to d2, both are the possible looking moves, but in this game, I eventually pushed my e5 pawn, and black brings out the bishop on f5 before playing e6, and he is hoping to play the c5 move in the future to activate his bishop. Queen b6 is also coming to apply pressure in the center and along this file. After a couple of moves later, I played my Stockfish gambit by pushing my pawn to g4, and after the bishop moves back, I played knight e2 to reinforce my knight on g3 and push my f and h pawns all the way to the king side, reaching the h5 square to create vulnerability around the king side. He responded with the c5 move to activate his bishop diagonal and put pressure in the center. After one move, he played knight d7 to increase pressure against the c5 pawn and then moved h4 to prepare for h5. You cannot play h5 yourself because I can eventually play knight to f4 and attack the bishop, causing you to lose control over its protection. Now, there's potential weakness as your g-pawns might become doubled in the g-file. In this position, he didn't play h5 and instead captured the center pawn, forcing my knight to capture in d4, and he played h5 with a trick. Since the knight is not on the e2 square to reach f4 and attack the bishop, he played h5 himself. Some might consider g5, but it's a bad move because it blocks the activity of all pieces. My knight can't be active in the center, and the light square bishop won't be as active either. Eventually, black can easily develop their pieces by reinforcing the knight and bringing out the bishop. In this version, I avoided playing g5 because it would have closed my position completely and hindered my piece's activity. Instead, I decided to play f4, building a strong structure on the king side while keeping my knights active in the center. My light square bishop is also very active, with bishop b5 coming to apply pressure along this diagonal. After he captures the pawn, I didn't recapture it immediately because he could simply play bishop to h5, forcing my queen to move again and gaining a tempo. Instead, I chose to push my f5 pawn, sacrificing another pawn to gain dominance over the position. Some of you might consider playing bishop to h5 to protect the pawn. However, this move exposes vulnerability in your position after I capture the pawn on e6. After captures occur and my knight moves to e6, the queen becomes vulnerable. Where should the queen move to? If it moves to c8, my other knight can join the party by playing knight takes d5, leading to a potential knight c7 check. As the knights dominate the center, the bishop also becomes active. Moves like bishop g5 and the queen's open d5 diagonal are mind-blowing. After the queen moves to f7, I can play the move bishop e5 to dominate the diagonal. After the king captures the knight, I play the stunning move, knight to f4, checking the king. The king can't move to f7 due to the e6 pawn move. After the king moves to e7, I execute queen d6 check, the king moves back, and there's another queen d6 check, the king's knight blocks it, and then comes the stunning move, rook to d1, exerting pressure on the knight, and putting your position in serious jeopardy. The game will be over. And let me make a quote for you. When you meet that special someone, you will understand why it didn't work out with anyone else. So returning to the position, you will notice that any move other than the best one weakens and exposes vulnerabilities. After black captures the pawn on f5, here comes my absolutely brilliant move. I sacrifice not just one, but two pawns. Initially, I sacrifice my g4 pawn, followed by sacrificing my f pawn. Now, I go even further by sacrificing another pawn on e6. If you decide to capture the pawn, then after the knight moves to e6, the queen moves away, and knight takes d5, the problematic situation for your king will resurface. With the bishop coming to g5 and the queen's open file, I can even bring my rook to the d1 square, and you can see that everything will be in my favor. The same position will be reached again. Let's return to the position. We've observed that the move f takes e6 was a bad choice for black, so they decided to move their knight. In this position, some of you might consider playing e takes f7, but it's a very bad move. After the king captures the pawn, the bishop becomes active on the diagonal, and the knight can reach e7 and then c6. Everything favors black in this scenario. They have 3 extra pawns with dominance over the open e file, leading to a completely winning situation. Let's return to the position. You can see that I sacrificed 3 pawns, and now I have to decide which piece to sacrifice next, the queen or the rook. Ultimately, I decided to sacrifice even more by playing pawn to h5, sacrificing yet another pawn. If you're tempted to capture the pawn on h5, it will create a vulnerable situation for you because you'll lose control over the f5 pawn. So, after I play a bishop b5 switch check, the king moves up. I can easily grab the pawn on f5, giving a check. The king has only one square left to go to. After the knight check, the king moves back, and then comes the move bishop g5, pinning down the knight. Queen e6 is coming next, leading into a checkmating sequence for e5. If you're tempted to play g3 to attack the queen, I can even sacrifice my rook by capturing your bishop because queen e2 is vulnerable. In this position, you might be tempted to play queen c7, provoking the king to engage in a good square. However, after queen e2 check, the king moves away, and queen e8 will be a checkmate. Returning to the position, we've seen that key moves like knight takes pawn or bishop takes pawn, even rook takes pawn, are vulnerable. So, what will you play now? If you capture the pawn with your knight, the d5 pawn will be unguarded, and my bishop can easily give you a check, creating a vulnerable situation around your kingside. Therefore, black decided to move back their bishop. After I play bishop e5 check and the king moves up, we have queen to e2, focusing on this extreme file to exert a check to the black king. Some might consider playing f takes e6, which would create a vulnerable situation around your queen. While you may be pleased with your strong central control from the pawn chain, I can easily disrupt it by capturing your key pawn on e6 with my knight. After you capture it with your king, I can play the stunning move bishop e6 check, attacking both the black king and queen simultaneously, resulting in the loss of the queen. Returning to the position, black didn't capture the pawn, knowing the vulnerability around their king as all the minor and superior pieces are locked in their home squares, unable to free from their positions, so black decided to play queen to d6, trying to save their territory. But after I play rook to f1, I now have the open f and e files, and you cannot just play simple moves. Let's consider playing knight to h6. As the knight is developed, the predictable move bishop to f4 emerges, directly challenging the queen and setting up a vulnerable position. In response, capturing the pawn on e6 is decided, followed by bishop f4 and long castling, exposing the open files for rooks while making the queens susceptible. The queen's vulnerability is evident with its sole protection of the pawn on e6. Moves like bishop c7 or the stronger knight a4 further disrupt the queen's position and create a superior advantage. This strategic play leaves opponent positions confined behind the king, especially after the move g6 is played. I played the critical move, knight to a4, disrupting the queen's position. With limited escape options, how can the queen secure a good outpost? Moving to queen d8 leads to checkmate with queen takes e6. Alternatively, queen a5 leaves the e6 pawn vulnerable, enabling queen takes e6 and advancing the rook to e5, setting up for queen e8, while some may argue queen e8 is well protected by the knight. Overlooking the sacrifice leads to knight takes, rook takes e8, culminating in a beautiful checkmate at d8 for the king. Returning to the position, with the queen under attack and limited escape routes, he decided to capture the piece on d4 and sacrifice the queen emerges to safeguard the position. This move aims to develop minor pieces like the knight and bishop while connecting the rooks. However, the culminating move, queen e5, poses a threat with the potential to check by playing queen c7. After the capture check and 9 blocks on e7, I seized the opportunity to capture the pawn on b7, putting pressure on the rook. If the rook shifts to c8, protected by the knight, and in a sudden move, I can make a decisive move bishop to d6 which attacks the knight in the center, showcasing active bishops and a dominating queen. With the bishop guarding the square, the rook cannot save the knight, setting up a favorable position. Additionally, rook e1 is poised to attack by capturing the pawn on e6. Your inactive and unmobilized bishops and pieces further tilt the game in my favor, so in this position, upon the move a6, I refrained from capturing the rook immediately. And he connected the rooks in the middle game with bishop g7. With knight c5, followed by bishop e5 to pressure the rook, despite the invitation to capture the rook, I held back, aiming to position my rooks on a6 for a coordinated attack alongside the knight on c5 against e6. This strategic play immobilizes and underdevelops your minor pieces, leaving your position in a precarious state. The game is completely over for black. Despite black's attempt to hold the game by playing aggressively, I'm the world's #1 chess engine. A few moves later, I seized the opportunity to play bishop to d6, attacking the knight, leaving you unable to safeguard it. If you choose to protect your knight by moving it, I can easily play bishop to e5, check, forcing your king to move. Regardless of where your king goes, I can then capture your bishop on h8. This exposes a weakness in your position. In response, you decided to leave your king exposed, allowing me to capture your bishop. After moving the knight, I check your king on f7, pinning the bishop to the king. Following the king's move, I capture the bishop, leading to a series of captures. After a few more moves, the game reaches a deadlock for you. I seal the game with a checkmate by playing queen to g7. It's a decisive victory, and the game is over. What an astonishing chess game I played. I employed the Stockfish strategy by starting with pawn to g4, and then made a sudden sacrifice of my g-pawn. Following that, I sacrificed my pawn on f5, and then went further by sacrificing another pawn on e6. This strategic maneuvering resulted in a complete deadlock situation for black. This opening strategy exemplifies a tactical position where the black king faces a game-over scenario, leading to a close victory with domination over the pieces in black's position, especially with a closed center. It was a very beautiful game played by LeelaZero and me. I hope you enjoyed it, and please don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. I also have another channel named AHS Channel. Don't forget to watch those videos as well. Wishing you all the best. Bye bye, see you later.